Hey Wargamers, Tau Empire won a 76-man major ITC event this past weekend. Today we are going to break down that list, take a look at how it works, and just kind of talk about it. Pretty casual thing. Before we get into that though, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, if you like any of my other videos, go ahead, hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell. That way you don't miss any of my upcoming 40K content. Okay, so like I said, Tau won a major ITC event. This time it was Midwest Conquest. Midwest Conquest was a 76-man tournament down in Kansas City. They used the Renegade open format. So that basically works by having 4 different missions that you can select from. You choose what your primary mission is each tournament round, and you know, that mission is not necessarily going to be the same mission that your opponent chooses. So it's an asymmetrical mission design. And how that works is you have 2 missions that are kill point based and 2 missions that are objective based. There's a kill point mission. There's a assassination kill point mission where you have to select 4 targets, and your success is based on completing those kills. You have another mission that is based on just controlling as many objectives as possible, and then you have another mission that is based on controlling specific objectives, generally, well, specifically the ones that are in your opponent's deployment zone. So those ones are worth more than the ones that are in your deployment zone or in no man's land. So 4 different missions that you get to select, and so it's important to keep that in mind when looking at how this list performed. The winner of Midwest Conquest was Richard Window. Yep, Richard Window. So congratulations, Richard. So today we're going to look at his list and how it performed. We should also mention what the opponents were. So based on Best Coast pairings, I have a list of people that Richard played against, and these are people that, well, some of which I've played against and others that I haven't. But Alex Hunt, he played Grey Knights with Imperial Knights. Andre Richmond played Eldari. Matt Neely played Tau, so he had a Tau versus Tau matchup there. Jason Barrow played Death Guard. Mike Smith played Thousand Suns, and Sam Henley played Necrons. So quite a diversity of lists. Not a lot of not a lot of repeats or anything, right? So a pretty diverse list. That's encouraging, right? That means that the 8th edition meta, or at least the meta around this event, was at least strong enough that it supported multiple different types of builds throughout the tournament, right? He didn't run into Eldar, or Tyranids in the last 3 games or anything like that. There's a diversity of lists, and so that's a good thing. But one thing that all of these armies have in common, without seeing the specific list, is that they'll tend to have a few big units like Primarchs or Knights or Riptides or Storm Surges, but they'll also have a fair number of infantry in them. And so, you know, if we're thinking about lists that are going to do well against that, we have to take a little bit of a take all comers approach. We have to think a little bit about units that are going to do well in multiple different situations, and I think Richard's list does that. So I have a picture, or I have a couple pictures of what Richard's list was based on the Best Coast pairing apps before the event expired for me. So I think this is right, but I could be wrong. And I don't have lists for what all these other folks were playing, but you know, that's just some generalizations. Like I said, very informal, but I think there's some interesting things that we can learn by just looking at this list. So Richard's list was 2 detachments. The first one's a battalion, and it's Tau Sept. He had a Cadre Fireblade. He had a commander in a Cold Star battlesuit with just the basics, a high output burst cannon and a missile pod, and then he also had Dark Strider. So those are his 3 HQ choices. For troops, he had 3 units of 9 Fire Warriors with Pulse Rifle. Again, this is something I think that's interesting, is that he doesn't specifically list the Shazwi options here. They're all Shazla, which I don't know if that's just assumed to be part of it because it's an upgrade that's free, but generally when I'm writing a list, I want those things to be explicit. Moving on to elites, he had 3 Riptides. Each of them had 2 smart missile systems, heavy burst cannon, target lock, and velocity tracker. So this is different than the loadout that I normally recommend, which is target lock and advanced targeting system. But if we look at the list that Richard played against and think about it more generally, having that velocity tracker can actually be really helpful, especially when facing lists that have a lot of the fly keyword. The fly keyword is one of the strongest keywords in the game, and so when you're able to improve your ballistic skill when firing against units like that, that's going to make a big difference. That's going to mean that with sufficient marker light support or anything like that, your Riptides could be hitting on 2s, which is awesome. So yeah, I think that's certainly worth considering, is that in fly keyword heavy metas, the velocity tracker is going to be a lot more valuable to you than you might think. Typically, I am going to try to shy away from specialized weaponry or specialized war gear like that because I'm not sure that I'm going to run into a fly keyword. But I think maybe the meta is moving in such a way that you kind of can assume you're going to run into the fly keyword, at least enough to make it worth taking the velocity tracker. So I think that's an interesting choice, something that I'm going to be looking at more in the future. Moving on to fast attack, he has 3 units of tactical drones. You guessed it, they are all shield drones. The thing that's interesting here is that they are 8 shield drones strong. Normally I would be concerned about losing them to morale, but there's a component in this list that I think helps deal with that pretty well. But having 3 units of shield drones, basically these are here to support those Riptides. I think that's pretty straightforward, and that's a lot of ablative wounds, right? That's 8, 16, 24 ablative wounds without making any of your shield generator feel no pain type things. So don't underestimate how much of a difference that can make. All right, the next detachment again is a battalion. He has a Fireblade and then another Cold Star. This time the Cold Star has 4 fusion blasters, the typical loadout, then an ethereal. The ethereal, I think, is what really makes all this kind of work. There's some risks taken in some of these unit choices in terms of morale and output. So having the ethereal is just like a nice bit of glue to hold it all together and make sure that things are functioning the way that you want them to. Moving on to troops in this second detachment, he has 3 5-man Fire Warrior teams, strike teams. These are here just to basically give him the battalion and the command points, but overall we are moving towards, let's see, 30, 27 plus 15 is what, 42 Fire Warriors, which is not a small amount of Fire Warriors, especially when you have Darkstrider and a couple Cadre Fireblades on top of that. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of shots, plus an ethereal on top of that. So you're getting a lot of small arms fire that are going to be able to deal with all that infantry that we're seeing with these lists that Richard played against, whether that's Thousand Suns or Tau or Necrons. Having that number of shots is going to be very helpful. For elites, he has 2 units of stealth battle suits, each of them 3-man strong with burst cannons. These are basically here in order to buffer against deep strikers, although that's not really an issue anymore, but more importantly, infiltrators, right? So these guys are going to be deployed ahead of time and keep your deployment zone safe from infiltrators, right? So overall, when we're looking at the list, a lot of these things just work, right? The Riptides do all the heavy lifting. The Fire Warriors are dishing out tons of shots. Not that the Riptides aren't, but on top of that, you're getting tons of Strength 5 shots. The tactical drones are keeping those Riptides alive, and then all the characters support those different units. I think the reason why the Cold Star with just the heavy burst cannon, the missile pod, works is because he's there to basically do some cleanup work, right? He has the mobility in order to cap objectives, be where he needs to be, but he also has a fire or a weapon loadout that you can use it if you need it, but if you don't use it, it's not the end of the world. You're not investing a ton of points into the war gear on that. So he's the guy that you can do all of your commander stratagems with, right? He can call Kaoyan, he can do the command and control node, he can do NeuroWeb Jammer, multi-spectrum sensor suite. He can do all those things. He's your everything guy. Whereas the Cold Star with the 4 fusion blasters, he has a job. He's going to go do that, and it's a very aggressive role. You don't necessarily want to hold him back and have him be doing these things to support Riptides or whatever else. Instead, you have the one Cold Star that's able to do a few different things. Granted, I wasn't at the event. I didn't play it. I don't know how he actually used these lists. And so, Richard, if you're watching, I'd love to talk to you about it. But overall, I think this just makes sense as a really well-rounded list. And I think that's why it did well against a well-rounded field of opponents. I think those two things are really closely knit, because if it was just Tyranid, or Eldar at the last 3 rounds, I don't know if this well-rounded list would do as well, right? It would be much more rock, paper, scissors, and if you get a bad matchup, then maybe the tournament doesn't turn out the way it did. But because of how well-rounded the field was, a well-rounded list can prevail. So overall, I think this is a really good list. I'm going to be looking at adopting some of these things, like using velocity trackers more often in my own lists as well, and maybe bringing on that second kind of less intense version of a Cold Star commander to do some of the dirty work that I wouldn't want my quad fusion commander to do. So those are things that I'm going to be thinking about incorporating in my list. I think it's a really interesting example. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think this list is clearly amazing? Do you find issues with it, some context dependency, idiosyncrasies, or anything like that? Love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this video was made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you also enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, NoExcusesPanda, Paul Lueders, TauOswell, Nick Steele, Jared Egeler, Brian Mann, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Cristofer Sarale, Youhei Penguin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Giovanni DiMaggio.